just because we create that microclimate by creating that canopy much earlier, close up a canopy. The white mold fungus needs a reduced light intensity and quality to produce those actual white mold mushrooms that release the spores, or the Apophysia that we call them. And then in season, like where we are now, if we're still within that window, we can make a fungicide application. So an effective fungicide at the right time and applied in the right way too, to try and get canopy penetration. So between R1, the beginning of flowering, through to R3, the beginning of pod development, we want to protect the flowers because that's of course how white mold enters through the plants. There are things such as biologicals, contans. We have a trial this year that we set up last year that we're looking at contans in larger plots to get a better sense of, or more data points on that. We do know it certainly reduces sclerotia in the soil. I think it runs in the order of $40 to an acre, but you have to certainly check with a salesperson on that. So it's not a cheap product, but it's it does work. It's just a question of, unfortunately, you only need a few sclerotia to initiate disease if conditions are right. So it's definitely, it can be part of a management program. And crop rotation, you know, a cover crop potentially with small grains can be very helpful. And with the small grains, what we're doing there basically is creating a canopy, hopefully getting those white mold sclerotia to germinate, produce their mushrooms, and then there's nothing to infect, especially if it's a small grain crop. And then no-till as well. So in no-till situations, we end up with a lot of those sclerotia, those resting bodies of white mold fungus on the soil surface, where they just don't survive as well. If you're using tillage, you're going to incorporate those into the soil where they survive for a longer period of time. And so you just got to be mindful of tillage operations. But perhaps an ideal scenario would be no-till soybeans to help reduce white mold. Just to sort of emphasize a couple of points, here's a slide demonstrating the significance of using variety resistance. So this is some trial data from 2020 or 20, yeah, anyway, it doesn't matter. So we're looking at the yield on the y-axis here, and then the amount of white mold severity on these different lines that we looked at. And I've just tagged them with their relative maturity. You can see there's a very tight relationship between, you know, the amount of disease higher on this end of the correlation and lower yield because of that. And then some of these other varieties that, even though they're in an environment just like all the other varieties in this trial with heavy disease pressure, they had a lot less disease and yielded because of that. In terms of thinking about fungicide applications and trying to get a sense of, like, are we at risk or not, we have Sporecaster, which is a free tool that you can download for iPhone and Android, and basically drop a pin where you are and figure out your risk for your different situation. I do really want to point out that a lot of people do confuse these bird nest fungi with the white mold Apophysia, and yeah, these bird's nest fungi are very, very common. They look like a little bird's nest with what appear to be eggs. There's basically spore masses inside of them. And it's not the white mold fungus. That's very, very common and very easy to see. So a lot of people get confused. The actual white mold Apophysia are much, much harder to find. And honestly, I don't think it's a very good scouting tool just because they're so hard to find. But the Sporecaster app is basically trying to predict when these white mold Apophysia are coming up into the, or starting to germinate and release their spores. So that's part of that, what that application does. Here's a screenshot from Sporecaster, and what we have been seeing this season. Earlier on, we were at low risk generally across the state for Apophysia development. A student, Jill Check, is out there now. We're working with Jamie Wilbur, our potato sugar beet specialist, because she actually did a PhD on this out in Wisconsin and helped develop this Sporecaster app. Anyway, so Jill is just starting to find Apophysia out there, and in this photo here, if you count carefully, I can find 10 Apophysia in this particular image. So it just goes to show you how small they are. They're smaller than her fingernails there. You know, hard to see, right? I'm on the left here as well. You can see just some pins that I've dropped across the state here showing different levels of risk. And once we hit that sort of red area, that's a high risk, a high likelihood of seeing Apophysia in the field. And so these numbers in the balloons here is just the percentage risk. So the threshold now is set at 40%. So once we're above 40%, we consider that to be high risk. And if you've had a history of white mold in the past, probably a good candidate for a fungicide application. We do a lot of fungicide efficacy trials, and I don't have time to really go through that, but I did want to put up some products that are rated as good or very good here. If you go to the Crop Protection Network and click through the soybean links there, we have these fungicide efficacy charts for soybean diseases. We also have them for corn as well. So that's a really good resource. Just before I switch off soybeans, I just wanted to mention we certainly have some very significant flood damage, of course, with all those heavy rains. And it's really brought on the Phytophthora root rot, both out west and up in the thumb area, at least the lower thumb. There's some very, very significant Phytophthora root rot that's out there. A lot of the samples that are being submitted are coming back with very strong tests with some of the assays that we use in the diagnostic lab. And also when we do isolations in the lab as well, we're confirming that that is Phytophthora root rot. Those rains have also brought on some soybean sudden death syndrome. So that's something else that we'll be contending with, especially as we go through reproductive stages here. That tends to be when SDS flares a little bit more. Just very quickly on Phytophthora, there's a couple of genes that are on a lot of seed tags, RPS1C and 1K. They just don't offer much protection anymore. Unfortunately, the pathogen, or the vast majority of the pathogen out there, has overcome those genes. RPS3A is another gene that seems to control nearly 70% of the isolates. So if you have an issue with this, think about that RPS3 gene, 3A gene, if you have access to it. And then I think we really need to be paying close attention to the field tolerance or partial resistance that is in the seed catalog, and then double checking with your seed salesman is this the best information? Because we certainly do see situations in many diseases that part of the issue is we have varieties turning over so quickly. It's sometimes hard to get a really good bead and have the best and latest information perhaps in those seed catalogs. So just verify with your seed salesperson, and then seed treatments as well, using those to help manage this disease. Okay, I'm going to switch to tar spot now. Try and keep this moving. So tar spot of corn, unfortunately, it's here and it's here to stay. So it survives on infected residues. We've done some work with colleagues and here in Michigan and shown that, yeah, it survives on that infected residue, unfortunately. So it's going to release spores in the early spring and start initiating infections. And then it only takes about 2 to 3 weeks from the time we see a spore infect the plant until we see another black tar spot structure on the plant. And just really quickly, it's hard to ID it early in the season. We are looking at very, very small spots on the plant, typically very low in the canopy, those lower leaves at the very start of the season. So it's a very hard thing to scout for, much harder than northern leaf blight and grey leaf spot that we're all very familiar with. And I think that's part of our issue in terms of just being aware of where it is. So some of our efforts here focus really on trying to map where tar spot has been popping up. This grey area is showing the historical distribution. And I put that red circle here around the southern end of Lake Michigan to show you historically, this is where it's been. This is where it sort of got started. In 2015, northern Illinois and Indiana is where things got started, and it spread out from there. This year we've found it now or had confirmations in about 14 different counties across Michigan. I think basically anywhere where we've seen it before, it's very likely to be present, including all the way up into the tip of the thumb. Probably a little bit less pressure there, but just because it's been spreading out from around Lake Michigan, but I'd be still just scouting very, very carefully. We've done a number of different fungicide trials, and we have more going on this season. This is a fungicide timing trial where we use TrivaPro to look at different fungicide timings to see how that would affect disease or suppress disease. So this is irrigated trial, not like is shown behind me in this screen thing. Disease onset was on about July 17th at very low levels, and from there it started to escalate. Even at the end of July, when we went in and did ratings, it was hard to find, and it was very, very low levels, and so that's why there's not much of a value above 0 here. It wasn't until sort of late August that things really started to explode, and you could actually pick differences between treatments or even between hybrids, because we had some hybrid trials out there too. So one of the questions is, when do we spray? Well, typically these very early vegetative sprays are not going to really offer too much control. And so I would save your money potentially on that and then put it into maybe an R1 timing. And if you really want to try and fine tune things, you know, be mindful of how much tar spot or how likely there is to be pressure in your field, and is it present or not. I think we still have some fine tuning that we can do. Unfortunately, you know, pulling the trigger at R1 about mid-July, we still have a couple of months of photosynthesis that we want to protect. So that's asking an awful lot from a single fungicide application. So potentially delaying that a little bit, you know, maybe through to R3 at the end of July might be a good decision. It's going to depend on the year, the hybrid, and how, you know, future weather plays out. So it's a difficult decision, but anyway, what we did see in this particular slide deck here is that, yeah, those really early vegetative applications weren't particularly useful for, or weren't very as efficacious as those ones at R1. We did notice, you'll see on the graph here, that the R5 looks good at the start of September, but R5 applied on the 21st of August was too late for this epidemic, because we had very significant levels of disease developing in August. So even though it looks good in September, it didn't look good at the end of August. In terms of just looking at these particular treatments, you know, the R4 timing actually looked to be perhaps the preferential treatment in this particular trial. It's not going to play out every year. Again, it depends on when things get started. To play it safe, I'd probably shoot between R1 and R3, and I understand as well scheduling aircraft or sprayers is another thing we need to be aware of. We did a number of other efficacy trials. I'm just going to show you one of these here today, looking at different products. And so you can see in this particular graphic that even though all these products were applied at that R1, 17th of July, they did certainly help suppress disease, right, even through to late August. It's nowhere near as bad as that untreated check. But once we get into September again, you know, things start to climb, because we almost need a second application or to delay that first application. Just a couple of things to think about, and I'll wrap up here. I've got 2 slides, I think. So stalk integrity is a really important thing to be mindful of. If we have a very significant amount of tar spot, we see that stalk integrity is affected very significantly, and this is what this plot shows here. So in untreated plots, we're losing about 70% of stalks. You just push them and they're snapping. Where we have a treatment, we're able to reduce that down to about 15 to 50% of those stalks snapping. So just something to be mindful of. And then this is the yield response that we saw from these various treatments for that one particular trial last year under irrigation. So between about 25 and 50 bushel protection from that R1 timing. All right, so just last slide. So hybrid resistance is going to be the key, just like I said in soybeans, right? Like trying to find those hybrids with the best resistance package possible. Again, talk to your seed salesperson. Weather, of course, is going to really have a big factor there, and irrigation certainly promotes leaf wetness and more disease. And then scout for really well-timed fungicide applications and for lodging potential later in the season. Crop rotation and residue management really don't seem to be effective at all. We've had plenty of fields that have never had corn before, or are, you know, completely, no residue and get plenty of tar spot because it blows in. It's a regional issue. So with that, I just want to thank the commodity groups for the support for these projects and Project Green, and I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Marty, so I want to go back to you for a quick second in there. I know you were busy answering questions here in the chat a little bit ago, but one thing that has come up around in the southwest part of the state for the last couple of least the last couple of days has been, guys that planted early this year and their corn is pretty advanced as compared to normal. Do you see that as being kind of a longer term trend? We've kind of found our first infections or our first lesions in corn leaves here in that, of any real sizable number in the early part of July to the mid part of July. Is there advantage to going to that early corn and kind of getting that at least a good portion of the growing season underway before we get higher numbers of tar spot lesions?
No, I don't think it really matters. I would plant the agronomically recommended maturity for your area and planting date and all that sort of thing. I wouldn't. So we've done work to look at that. A corn hybrid that has a longer growing season has the potential to lose more yield just because you're trying to capture photosynthesis for a longer period of time. But it all just comes back to variety resistance. I wouldn't go changing any of those practices. I certainly wouldn't go changing tillage practices. We need to do a better job we are working on that, and companies are too, but that's what we need to focus on, trying to find resistance, the best resistance that we can.
So on that front, do you think, well, I guess if you had your wish list, what would it be from the companies there? Would it be, obviously we'd like to have better ratings or a very easy comprehensive rating system out there for guys to go. I'm always concerned, and I know those sales plots are always designed to put your best foot forward with corn, but in some respects, if we had one of those that wasn't treated, even though we had tar spot in the area, it would be very helpful, I think, for folks. And I know that's hard to rally behind that, but it does seem that we see, and you and I have looked at enough corn plots and different hybrids out there to see that it really makes a huge difference in terms of how it really impacts the plants, right? And is there anything guys can do to really get a better gauge on this year? Obviously, they can look at their own fields, but so
the problem is the hybrids turn over fairly quickly, right? And so it just comes back to making sure you really ask those questions of your seed dealer, like what do you really know about this? We have private screening trials that we're doing to look at specific hybrids for certain companies that want to do that. All the companies are doing the best that they can, but we're trying to help some of those folk out as well. It'd be great if there's a whole bunch of untreated check plots around, but I don't know that that's necessarily going to happen.
Yeah, I can understand why that can happen, or probably won't happen in that process anyway. We got a question from Bill Strangle to ask about what other soybean diseases are on the radar screen this summer. As
we go into August, soybean sudden death syndrome. I mean, we see it in hot areas in June, but it's going to really start popping here as we head into August. So that's one to be looking for, understanding which fields have that disease. That's really important. The Phytophthora, I hope we really see some recovery, where we don't have plant death. But I hope we do see some recovery in those areas that have had pretty significant flood damage. And there's other things going on too, right? With that flood damage, we're going to see fusarium, we're going to see Pythium and Rhizoctonia. There is new root growth coming out of a lot of those soybeans. I just hope we have enough time to make some grain.
Fantastic, absolutely. I know you answered a few questions in the chat. I do wanted to kind of cover at least one or two of them again, though, in there. So how far or how long does tar spot survive on corn residue, and what residue is it likely to be coming from?
It's really only going to come from that corn residue. We see similar sort of related species on grass weed species, but I don't think the corn tar spot is on those grass weed species. So I think it's really just going to come from that corn residue, and we have plenty of corn residue to go around, right? So there's no shortage of inoculum. And I put in the chat there, even if you decide to burn all of your corn stubble, it doesn't matter because the spores are just going to blow in from outside anyway. So don't go, breaking up the moldboard plow or doing anything crazy. It's not going to make a difference. And we've had plenty of instances of that where we've had, virgin cornfields that have been smashed with tar spot just because it blows in from outside.
And you also covered the growth stage where leaf wetness is the most critical. And I guess sometimes we're thinking about how much growing seasons left in that process too, right? But so what do you see as being the most critical in terms of leaf wetness?
It's a good question. So I would say really, July, August, and probably, that September as well is our key time. I mean, it's when we're doing our most photosynthesis for biomass and grain production. It's tar spot can infect, V2 corn plants. But we don't tend to see that out in the field because things are only just getting started. It's an exponential growth, right, as I sort of showed in some of those charts. So the July, August, once we've actually got a canopy there, that's what drives things. When it was really dry at the start of June, I'm like, okay, I think it's going to be fairly quiet. And then we had that, week, 10 days of constant rain, and tar spot was certainly front and center of my mind. Not that like, oh, we've got the epidemic right now, but that primes the pump. It provided enough leaf wetness to get disease initiated. And then it really depends, like, are we going to get very frequent rainfall? So 2018 was a really good example of that. We had some really significant losses to tar spot because we had very frequent rainfall and a lot of overcast conditions. So extended leaf wetness, and that's key. 2019 and 2020 were dry, and Jeff can correct me, we're relatively dry during the season, right? Not a whole lot of frequent rainfall events. And so because of that, we didn't see the explosions that we did in 2018. I mean, there's certainly still fields affected, and there was a field in 2020 near Ionia, or both sides of Ionia, that we were hearing about. And we look back at the rainfall events in July and August, and that's where we had like actually above normal precip over that particular part of the state. And sure enough, that's where tar spot was a problem.
So we have this initial kind of group of spores out there. How long do we have to really kind of ramp up what we're looking for and just focus on what we're going to do again to decide to pull a trigger on treatment if we're going to?
Yeah, I mean, so I think we can apply through to mid-August, but I wouldn't be waiting around until then. Like if it takes off and you're too late, you're gonna, the damage will be done. Jason Roth from Winfield found, in a field in 2019, irrigated field, it had been sprayed at R1 and there was no tar spot. Tar spot had started popping in, I believe around about sort of early August, but he went in and sprayed around about the 20th of August and was able to see about a 20 bushel protection from that because, disease was starting to really kick up at that time of the season. So yep. I don't want to promote just a single late application. You might miss things. But if conditions, continue, it's something we're just going to be watching for.
So if you don't know for sure how susceptible your hybrid is, what level of infection or level of lesions on the leaf should we really focus on?
Yeah, I've been trying to figure out some sort of a threshold to get a sense of like when we should pull the trigger. So I'll back up again to what I just presented as well. So we sprayed July 17th last year at the R1 growth stage. It was only just visible, and I think most people wouldn't see it in the field because we had 4 or 5 people out there, Addie Thompson's crew, through this 10-acre block that's behind me, and we found it. Right, it was very, very early, very early. 2 weeks later, it was much easier to find. But anyway, spraying 17th of July last year, we were able to protect about 25 to 50 bushels because tar spot continued to develop, from that point on through into August and September.
Fantastic. A little different question came from Phil, which is if we're already at the end of R3, will it still be economically feasible to apply a fungicide for white mold?
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen that. So the problem is, though, once you go into R4, once most of that primary flowering is done, then you're trying to protect flowers. So that's why we always stress between R1 and R3, right? But it can still be R3, absolutely, and get good disease control. Yeah.
Jeff, we've had plenty of smoke down here, added to the haze from the humidity that we had, I think, just in this corner of the state. But so what's the outlook for that going forward here?
Well, it's and you're spot on. The Southwest has probably been the I guess the leader, if you want to call it that, in terms of the amount of smoke. But all of these hazy daytime conditions, where even though the sun is out, it looks like it's almost cloudy in some cases. And certainly the vivid sunrises and sunsets. These are all a result of lots and lots of smoke in the atmosphere. It is, as you mentioned, it is courtesy of the fires burning, wildfires, forest fires, et cetera, and large fires. We have to have it. That's the only way you can get that kind of smoke over the central and eastern portions of the country. But that's courtesy of winds. There's a layer about, it's been around 3,000 to 7,000 feet above the surface, but occasionally because of turbulence and mixing, some of it does mix down to the surface. I believe it was on Tuesday here where I am in Hazlet, I could actually smell it in the morning, but typically it's been above the surface, but it looks hazy as a result. And there aren't many other impacts, but in other portions of the Midwest, and as we saw yesterday in the news, there have been air pollution advisories because of this, because some of it did get down to the surface and lead to unhealthy air quality. It's been there mainly because of the large number and the large area of fires out in the West. And I unfortunately, you saw the forecast. It's not encouraging for many of those spots, and the fires likely will continue. Going to be a major challenge. So I'm guessing that we're going to see it at least occasionally, periodically here over the next several weeks during the fire season. Unfortunately, it's just one of those seasons, one of those years. But the drought and the very, very hot, dry conditions with that big ridge out over the west, those are not good forecasts for that area. So probably more of the same. But we will have occasional breaks like we have over the last day and today. But the smoke will return with this upcoming weather system that I mentioned here probably this weekend.
Fantastic. I know, Marty, your answered a question in there I thought was pretty good. And for those on the phone, I thought I would just go through it again. Phil asked if farmers switch fungicides if they're doing 2 applications. The mode of action, I think, is what he's getting to.
Yeah, so essentially we really only have 3 modes of action that we primarily use for field crops. And so just because you switch jugs doesn't necessarily mean that you're using different modes of action. But yeah, in theory, yeah, that's right. If you can switch up the products, that's a good thing. We don't generally recommend a single mode of action because of the chance for resistance development. And most products that are sold are typically 2 modes of action anyway now. Chris DeFonso had some good notes too about Western Bend cutworm.
Yeah, I was going to see if Chris could actually join us. Chris, can you kind of address some of your comments on Western Bend cutworm, because we definitely saw an uptick, or at least we have seen for the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I've had some pretty decent flights. I have a trap at the farm in Frankenmuth, and that had 234 moths on Tuesday, which is why I was seeing the smoke that Jeff was mentioning as I was driving back. And I had to go back and look in my old moth counts to see, if you were out west in Nebraska, 200 moths might not be a big deal, but for Michigan, it is. So I had to go back and look at moth counts, and like 2010, when we had a big Western Bean cutworm year, those were the kind of numbers that I'd get in Montcalm County, which is a hot spot of Western Bean cutworm. So, and then looking at the cornfields around there, like pretending I was a lady moth and where am I going to lay my eggs? All the fields around there were early April planted. The tassels are dried up and there's not a lot of pollen shed, and I didn't see any egg masses. So where are those moths going to lay eggs? They're going somewhere. They're trying to find someplace. And it's going to be the fields that got in a little bit later. So like a May planted corn, sweet corn production. And then if Scott Bales is on, they'll lay eggs in dry beans pretty much at any time. And so those little areas may act a little bit like a trap crop if the moths are desperate and they're finding one field in the neighborhood. So this is probably this week, at the end of this week, early next week, to go and kind of look around and assess what's happening. And again, a field can have nothing or it can be loaded. I mean, it's worth going out and kind of walking these fields. So in corn, you're looking for the egg masses or maybe signs of small larvae there, and it's a 5% threshold. In dry beans, the threshold was developed here at MSU, and you're going to wait for pod feeding to happen and look for those little pods to be fed on, and that's a 10% threshold. And in dry beans, you have a lot of time to spray because they climb up and down that plant every night. They're always going to expose themselves to pesticide. So I haven't seen any fields with a lot of egg masses, but I'm pretty sure that they're hanging out there somewhere. Those sneaky little moths are out there doing something bad.
So Chris, one of the things I remember from working with Western bean is they like to when they're very young, they like to go up to the top and feed on the tassels or the pollen packets of the tassels. So if they're laying on really pre-tassel corn and we're still 7 to 10 days out on tassel with some of our later plant stuff, can they survive without going up and feeding on those kind of tender and succulent parts of the plant?
So the highest survival is probably pre-tassel corn where the tassel is wrapped up in leaves, because they bore right through there, they chew right in, and here they have this protected place where the nice juicy developing tassel is sitting there, but the leaves are surrounding them. So a proportion do go up, maybe 80%. There are a few though that will go down on the plant and will go directly to silks. It's a small number, but some will actually do that. But the majority go up. And if the tassel is already open, it's exposed. There's things that eat them and they dry up and there's nothing really to do. So if you were looking at like a sweet corn kind of situation now, or really late field corn, not really late, maybe mid-May, that plant where you can feel the tassel, you grab it, you can feel it, but you can't see it yet, that would be very high survival rate probably, or higher for these little larvae.
Fantastic. And so I guess for both Chris and for Marty, if we are going to go through and try to treat for tar spot in some of these fields in the Southwest, and we're finding Western bean cutworm egg masses, can we get a double mix to be able to make that work? I know that's kind of a tough thing in general, but we've got some expensive airplane time coming through. Is that to mix those two together? Does that make sense, or is that going to get us into some other sets of trouble?
No, I think that makes a great deal of sense. Yeah, the timing is right for both. And
like we said last week, time it based on Marty, because I've had some people that have called me and they're putting mixes on corn right now at $30 an acre, and that $30 is fungicide. That's not counting the cost of the application. So they might be in for $38 an acre or something, but it's the fungicide that's costly, and that better be timed right. The insecticide is not so costly. Now you might miss some of the Western beans, some of these larvae you just might miss, but I'd rather you time it on the tar spot application, or else there's no use in doing it at all, it seems like.
So the other question, I guess we haven't been very dry, but I know you did have some soybean aphid populations up, especially up in the thumb, Chris. What's happening with those?
I just looked at the field I was following I went up there Tuesday. It is clean as a whistle. I mean, there's nothing. It looks like someone hoovered them or something like that. It's amazing what biological control can do if you just give it a little bit of time. I know that there's a few fields that may have truly gone over threshold, but once those rains came in, man, it alleviated a lot of plant stress and drought, and most of them are gone. They're the little teeny white dwarf now. They call them white dwarfs, little tiny ones. And so good news on the aphid front.
Perfect. So there's a question from Dave in the chat box. Is there a negative results from spraying fungicides in the evening with the dew forming shortly after or during the application? And likewise, spraying early in the morning, considering that there's going to be dew still on in that process. So what's the best timing if someone was going through with their high boy and you can actually get a timed application, Marty?
I'd probably avoid when you've got a lot of dew on the plant. You don't want product rolling back off, as you're going through, and that dew rolling off and taking the fungicide with it. These fungicides are rain fast very quickly. There's been work done out of Ohio on wheat that I can think of that, once they're dry, they're on there and they're not going to wash off. So thankfully, that's not really an issue. So for Dave's specific question, I'd probably lean toward the evening, just depending on how much leaf wetness we're really talking about. And I mean, part of the issue too is trying to get across fields. If it's your own high boy and you can control everything, I'd do the evening. If you're needing to wait for a wind speed to drop off.
I know the airplanes have been flying around here, and it's been very hard to get them everybody's dance card. So we're getting a little bit of mixed thing in there as well. There's another question from Scott, and he's going to ask it to kind of both Chris and Marty. What about tank mix for white mold, fungicide, and insecticide? Are applications this week too early, or are they going to be about on track? And is the second fungicide timing better, maybe 14 days from now?
I think, you're going to want to watch you're not outside of that R3 window, though. My guys were up spraying yesterday at Moth Counts, some slightly later planted soybeans are at the R2 growth stage. Our stuff down at Decatur was R3 last week or early this week. So, you don't want to go outside of that window. So you just got to, dry bean. Sorry, Scott. I should have realized it was Scott Bale. So,
dry beans.
Scott.
Oh, man, you really throw.
Jeez.
So, Jill,
I didn't look at that.
Yeah, Jill, one of the grad students, has been working with Jamie and myself to try and improve Sporecaster, particularly on irrigated situations, but also for other crops. So Jamie's interested in potato, we're interested in dry beans, and so we're working with Scott as well. And we're starting to find those Apophysia now. So if you've got that canopy, the Apophysia coming up, there's been plenty of moisture in the soil and the temperature's right, those Apophysia are starting to pop. I think, Scott, you feel free to unmute yourself, but I think we were just starting to flower. Well, yeah, I better not speak on that. But yeah, I mean, you want to time it to really try and coincide with when those Apophysia are coming through. And you can totally run that Sporecaster model for your dry beans, right? It should, as long as you've got a canopy, I think the prediction should be pretty reasonable. We're very happy or feel very comfortable with the dry land model. The irrigated model, I think we still need to tweak a little bit, but I'd run both, even if I have an irrigated field, and look at the various risks.
And as far as the insect side, Scott, I can recall the timing trials that we did on Western bean in the past and dry beans. That first and second week of August, one application, and the window was quite wide, was as good as 4 applications on the same plot. So that early August, maybe the first 2 weeks is a sweet spot for the insecticide. Again, then you'd have to time it based on the white mold, and that's what I would do. To me, this week seems early for dry beans because they're going to shift themselves from corn to dry beans in the next week or two. But I don't know how that lines up with white mold and Marty's risk.
Yeah.
Hi guys,
Go ahead.
Sorry, I wasn't sure about my sound quality today. We're on the road spraying white mold, but we're definitely at those timings where we're putting those first white mold applications on. So we have been getting that question a lot. Do we include insecticide this week, or do we wait 14 days and include it with the second application? So it definitely sounds like maybe that second application is the right answer.
I'd wait the 14 days. And if it doesn't work, it's on me. But I can't do anything about it. But I can show you the data for that. So, yeah.
So I guess Phil asked the other question in there, which is how long does the Apophysia actually emerge? I mean, is there kind of I know we have to have the weather to trigger that, but will they continue to emerge throughout the entire season, or is it just once we get this weather, we trigger it?
Not really through the entire season. I've got data to show we sort of hit a peak, but then, there'll still be those stragglers that keep popping up. So at least, you know, a few 3 weeks, depending, you know.
I'm just kind of looking through here to see if Dennis was on, talking a little bit about wheat. I know I was down in Hillsdale County the other day, and we were looking at a lot of folks harvesting wheat. It's been a struggle, that's for sure, to find the kind of conditions to get it harvested when it was wet, you know, and then unfortunately now we got a little bit of sprouting here and there. So it's a good question about where things are at with that. So, well, that's kind of what I had, and I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this morning, and certainly thank Chris for the observations, the late observations in there, and we will kind of get things around and get videos up, and hope to see you again next week.